Is Wynand Tastenhoye, and I'm a business analyst at Odoo. And for the coming 20 minutes, I'll show you a brand new feature in Odoo V12, and it's all about the creation of a vendor bill by email. So what are we going to discuss today? First of all, I'm going to show you some benefits for the accounting, but actually not only for the accounting department, but for everybody in your organization. Then we briefly go to how it works in Odoo. We definitely will have some time left, so I'll show you a short demo, and if you have some questions, don't hesitate to ask them after. So first of all, the benefits for accounting. I guess you already heard it several times today, yesterday, during talks or during the keynote. In this new V12 version, a lot of effort has been put in automatization of tasks, as well as becoming more and more paperless. And this new feature is part of those intentions. So we've noticed, or at least we think so, that the communication with the accounting department is changing all over the years. And instead of all suppliers sending their paper bill to the accounting department immediately, more and more we think that all kind of people within the organization are receiving invoices digitally or by mail or by another way. So we would like to replace this manual step of printing this bill and bringing it to the accountant so that the accountant has to create it by himself. We want to replace this step by just sending an email to a specific alias that you define on a specific purchase journal in Odoo, so that you take over the task for the accountant, and once that you've sent the email, it's done automatically. The use case of this, I will come back on this later, but we think that managers have their own suppliers with who they treat. For example, if I'm a manager of a consulting department, I want to organize a social activity, I organized it. When the supplier wants to send me the bill, he will maybe send it immediately to me because I'm his contact, he knows me, and I don't know the accounting, so he will send it directly to me. So I have lots of emails. I can forget it to print it, bring it to the accountant. So now with this feature, I can just forward it to an email and the task is done. A transaction is created within Odoo. So there is a trace and the accountant will not forget it because he has to do something with it. He has to delete it or he has to process it. So first of all, some benefits. First of all, the one that I want to discuss is communication. In lots of parts in Odoo, we have a chatter. Also, in the creation of a vendor bill, a chatter exists. What's specific, if you use this feature thanks to the chatter, the email itself will be stored in the chatter. So if you want to go back later in a few years and you were wondering who sent me that email, you don't have to go back to your email anymore, your own email, and search for hours who sent you this email. It's immediately centralized in the chatter, so it will always be available for you to look it up. But not only the email is stored, also the attachment will be there, so you don't have to find it in your archives anymore, in your binders. You just have it centralized on your vendor bill. So that's just when you create the vendor bill by this feature. The email will be stored, but also all other standard features of the chatter is available. Why could this be interesting right here? Because let's say, for example, the accountant wants to process the invoice. He opens it because it's coming in from the vendor by the alias. He opens it and he's seen in document that there is no VAT attached on the invoice, or that the invoice shouldn't be for the company, or there is something else wrong with the invoice, then he can just send the message and he will reply immediately from within Odoo to the supplier and ask maybe another document, an adapted document, or ask more specification about the document. The email again will be stored directly on the vendor bill. So if you were wondering later on what happened on this invoice, it's immediately centralized. You don't have to go through your emails anymore. So that's for external communication, but also internal communication. If you can log a note, as you can do it everywhere in the chatter, but you can log a note to ask, for example, a colleague, ping him on the invoice and ask him, is it okay to pay this invoice? So he will receive a notification. Also here, it will be stored forever. So if within a year you were wondering why something was not wrong or if it was okay to pay this invoice, all documentation is stored immediately, centralized at the same place attached to the vendor bill. You can also plan some, schedule some activities. So you can immediately from this chatter ask your colleague, for example, who is a purchaser, you can schedule him an activity so that he gets a notification that he must contact the vendor. For example, you've noticed that the prices are not correct. You can schedule an activity for your purchaser that he can contact the vendor, ask him to revise the prices, and everything will be stored again here. All this communication will always be adapted and centralized at the vendor. And finally, you can add followers. So if you want other persons to be aware if any changes are happening for this vendor bill, you can add followers so that they are aware of it. So that's the first benefit. It's communication. The second one I would like to discuss is uniformity. As I explained you, the functionality I will show you is just sending an email. So of course, from all your devices, you can use it on your smartphones, on your tablets, on your PC, on your Mac, because it's just using the standard email functionality. You're sending an email or you're forwarding an email to an alias and it works. So you can do it with all your devices at all the time. So for example, if I receive a mail right now with the document attached, I can immediately send it to the alias. It will create a draft vendor bill in Odoo so that later on the accountant can start working on it. There is a trace, he will never forget it. But as I mentioned before, we think also the way of accounting documents are coming into the organization is changing. So a few use cases would be that, for example, you can communicate this email alias immediately on your purchase order or in your terms and conditions to your vendor so that they send it immediately by mail instead of sending you the paper invoice. So just mention the email alias. At every time that the vendor or a vendor will send an email to that alias, it will create a draft vendor bill in Odoo, and there will be a trace of it. Also, as I mentioned, within your organization, you can share the alias with your colleagues. They can send it immediately. They don't have to print it anymore and come to the accountant. But also, if you receive them by paper, it's always better to have the image attached. So I think a lot of scanners now can send emails as well. So you can just scan it in your scanner, send it by mail, and when you come back at your desk, all draft vendor bills have been created based upon the email you sent by the scanner. That's about uniformity. Then the third one I would like to discuss is the audit trail, because I think if you have a financial audit or a fiscal audit, they always will arrive years later after you enter this vendor bill. So if you receive questions of them, why you pay this invoice, of what is this invoice about, you don't have to go back to your email again, search for it, when it has been sent, etc. Everything is stored immediately at the vendor bill. You have all information centralized in Odoo at one place attached to your vendor bill. Also, for internal audit purposes, maybe you want that an invoice of more than 5,000 euros may not be processed without an approval of someone. There is no workflow here, but you could imagine to ping a colleague, have his approval for this invoice so that the accountant can process. And later on, if there is any discussion, you have it stored immediately on the vendor bill. And then finally, extension. This is a really nice feature, I think, but it's only a start. You can have extensions on this, and two of the main extensions, I think, is the OCR and the Documents app. I'm not going in detail about this because there are specific talks about it, but basically what does the OCR? Once that you created the draft vendor bill, just for your understanding, the feature will just create a draft vendor bill, attach the image, but the image will not be scanned by this feature. That's an OCR functionality. The OCR will scan the document, try to obtain as much as information that it can and fill in this information in the fields automatically for you, but it's a secondary feature. So I'm not going to discuss this in detail. It's a talk that given by my colleague Nathan this afternoon at 3:30 p.m. in the theater. I think it could be nice for you to follow this because it's also a brand new feature in the V12. And secondly, there is the Documents app that Quentin discussed an hour ago. There is an integration between this Documents app and this feature because you could you could say that for every document that is created in the accounting app, the document must be stored immediately in a dedicated folder, for example, the finance folder, and you can add text on it. So a use case could be that you would imagine that all documents you created in 2018 are stored in the finance folder with the tag 2018. So if later on, again, you have a fiscal audit, you have a financial audit, they want a copy of all those invoices, you don't have to go to your archives, search into your binders, you don't have to search into your mails, everything is stored right here, and you can just create one document or share all the documents through a link. So that's a few benefits that I want to discuss with you. As I mentioned, the OCR talk is this afternoon at 3:30 p.m. in the theater, and the documents talk is already given by Quentin, but if you're interested in it, you can have a look at the YouTube video. So how does it work? I already explained it. It works by an alias. An alias is nothing new in Odoo. It already exists in other apps. So for example, in the CRM app, you could foresee an alias, a dedicated alias for the CRM app that will create opportunities in your CRM pipeline by sending an email to that specific alias. In the expenses app, you can just send an email to the specific alias linked to the expense app so that it creates expenses. And for example, in the projects app as well, you can define an alias per project so that if an email is sent to that project, it will create tasks within that specific project. So nothing new about that. What's new in the V12? That we made available this alias also to create draft vendor bills. So basically, you have to define it on your purchase journal so that for every purchase journal, you can link one alias. So if you want more journals, you can have several aliases. For example, if you want a purchase journal for invoices, for domestic invoices and for invoices from abroad, you can have two separate journals, each with their own alias, so that if you share it with your suppliers, you can decide what alias you share with them. So that's about it for the alias. Just know that if you download the standard version of Odoo in the SaaS, you will use the default email server settings of Odoo. So it's all configured automatically for you immediately, and the alias will be proposed immediately as well as a default value. But you can change the alias as much as you want. If you don't want to use vendor bills, you can change it to vendor or whatever. Just change the alias and it works. But if you don't want to use the domain name of Odoo, odoo.com, you can also foresee your own email servers and add this as an alias if you want to keep your own email servers. And then basically the last thing I wanted to explain before I give you a short demo is recognition. So I told you before, this is not an OCR functionality. The document will not be scanned by this feature, but the team has done nice work about at least a little bit of recognition when you create this vendor bill. I will show it to you in the demo. When the email is sent by an email address that is linked to an existing supplier in your contacts, then he will propose the vendor immediately by the creation of the draft bill. Also, if the email is not sent directly from the vendor, but if you as a manager received it from your supplier and you forward it, Odoo will scan all the history of the email, and if somewhere he finds an email address linked to an existing supplier, he will recognize it and add the vendor already to the draft vendor bill. And then finally, I added also user recognition. Why user recognition? Just there is a check in there that if the email is sent by a user known in the database, he will never be added as a supplier. So it's just a little check. So that's it about how it works. Now let's show you a little demo. I've created a database this morning, and I've just added the application of accounting. I did nothing else. So I refresh my page. The only thing that I changed is that I already created one vendor. I've created one vendor with an email attached WTA odoo@outlook.com so that I can show you that if I send an email from this alias, he will already recognize the vendor. For the rest, I didn't change anything. Now, how can you configure the alias? When you go to the specific vendor journal, you go to the settings, and you will see that in the advanced settings, there is a new field, email alias. You can define your own alias here or use the standard alias that Odoo proposes. So now, basically how it works, I'm just going to copy this email alias. I go to my mail, I create a new message, write subject, write a message, and I add my image. I prepare a PDF file here of an invoice, just attach it, and I send it to the Alias. So now when I go back to my database and I go to the dashboard of accounting, you will notice that something changed. There is one bill to validate. Every time you send a bill, of course, it will be counted there. I just click on it. And I've seen now that I received a new draft vendor bill. Because there is a @ you can notify that every time a vendor bill has been created by using the email address, you will have the @ and the vendor has already been chosen because I've sent it from the email link to the vendor. So now when I open it, I have my draft vendor bill with my PDF attached, and now I have the opportunity or to send it through the OCR so that Odoo can capture as much as information as possible from the image, or I can just edit it and continue processing my invoice. So finally, just to show in the chatter, I have my email right here under with the communication attached as well as my attachments. So that's it about my feature. I hope you like it, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask me.